So it's preparing here the live. So we're gonna be live in like. Okay, I think we are live now. Yeah. So we are live now. Just double check here. Yeah. We are live. Então, bom dia, pessoal. A gente vai começar agora mais uma live aqui com Greg Babs da DATAPATH. Hoje a gente vai falar sobre os processadores multidisplays da linha FX4, a nova FX4 HDR. E a gente vai falar também da integração com a Sender Box para painéis de LED. Então, mostrar que a FX4 não é um produto só para vídeo wall, mas também pode ser muito bem usado para LED. Isso a gente já tem uma experiência muito boa, não só aqui no Brasil, mas no resto do mundo, América Latina, bastante. A gente vende bastante as FX4 para painel de LED. Todo mundo que compra conosco aqui sempre fala muito bem, fala que melhora muito a qualidade do painel e também o tipo de sinal que é capaz de enviar. Então, já está começando, a gente vai começar. A gente vai fazer do mesmo modo que a gente estava fazendo as outras. Então, o Greg vai fazer toda a apresentação, vai falar. E eu vou acompanhando aqui, vou traduzindo. A gente tem o pessoal América Latina também, então quem precisar, tiver alguma pergunta em espanhol, eu consigo fazer. Greg can speak Spanish also, because right now he's almost a Spanish guy, so he can talk in Spanish also. So. Então, vamos começar e a gente vai sempre fazer daquele mesmo modo, manda as perguntas no chat lateral, a gente está sempre de olho, eu estou de olho, a Gabi está de olho aqui também, e a gente vai lá, vamos tentar falar mais um pouco sobre os produtos. So, Greg, this is your turn now. Let's show the guys what the new FX4HDR can do. And I was telling them about our good experience here in Brazil, not only Brazil, but on the rest of the world using FX4 with LED panels. Because right now, everyone is going to LED, so all the renter stage guys is using here in Brazil, so it's a good product.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining me for the last one of these, or the first one, or the second one, depends how many you've joined. This one is about our new FX4 HDR, and we're also going to look as well about how we've added support in Wall Designer and into the firmware of these devices to support LED controllers or LED installs. So in case you've missed it before, DATAPATH is a UK designer and manufacturer of video wall solutions. We're a global company with offices, tech support, sales, logistics in the UK, the USA, and Japan, as well as operating with a global distribution channel, of which Dealer is our distribution channel for Brazil, and AV is one of our distribution channels for LATAM. So let's get started. As a summary of our product line, we have three main categories. We have our VSN or VSN micro controllers for mission critical control room applications. We have our IOLITE controllers for boardrooms, auditoriums, things like that. And we have our multi-display products, which we're talking about today. Important just to say that all of those products can and are used. We have many installations with direct view LED. So LED product thing, you can use all of them with direct view LED. So just a summary of the product range. We have our HX4, which is our entry level product. It's got a single HDMI input and 4 HDMI outputs. You have a LAN and USB port for configuration, as well as an internal power supply. We also then have our FX4 HDMI, the difference being that we've added another HDMI connector as well as a DisplayPort connector, so we can support 4K 60 frames a second YUV 444 on the FX4 range. We also added a loop-through connector, which makes it much easier for larger installations where we have to loop or use more than one device together. We added an external sync connector, so if we're working with TV studios, for example, maybe we want the outputs to genlock to a house sync, we can do that with the sync connector. And as well, we have 2 LAN connectors as well as the USB. The reason we have 2 LAN connectors on the FX4 is also working like an internal network switch. So we can actually daisy chain the LAN, the network, as well as the actual video signal coming in. All right. Important to say though, that while we have 3 input connectors, you can only actually switch between and visualize one of those signals. So as soon as you select one of them, all of the outputs will see only that one video signal. We have an FX4 DisplayPort version. If you see from the yellow lines here, it's exactly the same device as the FX4 HDMI. The only difference is the output connectors are either HDMI or DisplayPort. All the other functionality is the same. We then released an FX4 SDI, which, as you can see from here, the outputs are then 3G SDI, supporting specific SMPTE modes. And we've also replaced one of the HDMI input connectors with an SDI, so we can support interlaced as well as progressive video wall content and outputs on this device. Okay. What we are excited to talk about is a new product in the range called FX4 HDR, which we showed for the first time at ISE this year. What you will notice that's different, the DisplayPort connector has now been changed for a HDMI 2.0 connector. So what does that mean? What does that give us? Well, it still gives us support for 4K 60 444, but what we have been able to introduce is the support for HDR 10-bit content through the HDMI 2.0 connector. In addition to that, it is the first and only product in this range that supports audio as well as video. So you can actually input an embedded audio video signal into the HDMI 2.0 connector and then select on an output by output basis which outputs need to output both video and audio. So that is an exciting addition for us. Another thing you will notice on the change is the loop out connector has of course changed from DisplayPort to HDMI 2.0. For those of you who can see, I'm not sure if you can on the slide, you will also see that we've added, which is a bonus of HDMI 2.0, support for HDCP 2.2. So there is a lot of new things that go into the FX4 HDR. So just to summarize, we've got support for HDR 10-bit. We have support for audio, and we have support for HDCP 2.2, all in this new box. Okay, so those are the big things that we're very pleased to announce with this box. Okay. So here I've just got a little comparison table. I'm not going to go through them. It's just in case anybody wants a copy of this presentation afterwards. Just write in the Facebook chat that you'd like one, and I'm sure Danilo can arrange for you to get a copy of the presentation. Okay. He can also, if he wants to, put my email address in the chat if you need to reach me directly. All right. So we also said, in addition to telling you about the FX4HDR, we tell you about the integration for direct view LED. So what has actually changed between LCD and LED, or projectors and LED, that makes it so special? Well, there are some primary challenges with direct view LED that maybe don't appear in other types of display technology. And those of you who've used the product before, probably guys in rental and staging, are probably more familiar with these challenges than others who are working with digital signage and are just now changing from LCD to LED, right? So those primary challenges: what happens when we need to use multiple LED sending boxes or LED controllers? How do we manage that to make sure that we are not tearing the content between the seams of these multiple senders? Okay. Another challenge is, of course, what happens to aspect ratios if the content and the aspect ratio of the wall are not the same? That's not a unique challenge. In fact, that happens all the time. Multi-projection, multiple LCDs in a creative video wall, or even a 3x2. So those kinds of things are the primary challenges with LED, and what we're going to cover here in this little chapter. Okay. No questions so far, I guess, Danilo, is there? I guess you would have shouted if anything came in. No.
Yeah, for now, we are okay. We have a lot of good people here watching the live. So we have just like Daniel Geroni, João Neto, we have Dimas from Lead, we have Odair, we have Christian Lins. Christian Lins is one of the guys here that always use and tell everyone about the good things.
Yeah, I've seen all the case studies from Christian. So big shout out to Christian if you're listening. Thank you for being a customer, and some great work that you've done with our product. So if you think I've missed anything, tell in the chat to others what you've done, or give them links to your case studies, because there's some really good projects in there. So big thank you to you, Christian. So I'm going to move on, but if there's any questions, let me know, Danilo, as we go through.
Okay, sure, awesome.
Cool. What does the FX4 do? So anyone who's used the product already, X4, HX4, FX4, whatever, you know that the big things we've done always is to crop a signal, to scale it if we need, up or down, and if we need to, we can rotate it, right? So those things are common throughout the range, okay? And things that we've always used, in particular, guys who use Resolume or Watch Out, Green Hippo, and other types of media server software, they're using these devices to crop all the time. We can also overlap, which may or may not be used. I know that customers, for example, who use a single source, let's say a bright sign player for a museum, you're needing the overlap feature, because you can't do that in, say, media server software, which you can do all the time, these types of geometry things. But what we've added is the ability to create a border, or to add pixels that don't exist to the original content, in order to preserve the aspect ratio, or to avoid the tearing, which I mentioned above as the two challenges we need to address. Okay, so you said that Layard is on the line. They'll be pleased to know that what I'm about to tell you is based on Planar's cabinet. So big shout out to Layard.
Yeah, so the guy from Layard is here, and we didn't know, but there is them on the presentation also. So everything is getting connected with the guys.
There you go. So big shout out to Planar Layard. They're going to be in this presentation. So let's imagine we're looking at an LED wall, right? There's two things that you can do. You can design an LED wall to a resolution, which we've seen companies like LG and Samsung start to release these 130-inch full HD walls just to make it easier for meeting rooms and things. But actually, this is the exception in the case of LED. Most of the time, we're designing a wall to a space, to a size, rather than to a resolution. And that creates the problem in the first place. So let's imagine we're using these planar TVF 0.9 pitch cabinets here. And we've got 5 wide, 4 high, filling our space, right? So that gives us a total resolution in this wall of 3200 by 1440, right? So we say, well, what does that really mean as AV people? How do we manage this wall? Well, what we really need to do is, when we're working with LED, typically use LED senders. And I can't remember the planar webinars which I've watched. I think they referenced IOLITE, but the contact here that's watching might know more. But their main brands of these senders are people like Novastar, Brompton, IOLITE, Linson. I'm sure there are others which I've missed, right? So the difference in direct view LED to LCD is we don't have a physical cable per display. We often are taking the AV signal to a sending card or an integrated controller, and that then converts to a proprietary signal format, typically over a category 5E or category 6 cable, and then we daisy chain to typically full HD 60 from the sending box. There are some 4K sending boxes, but most of them that I've seen today are still full HD 60 for reasons of price and availability, okay? So if we're looking at this wall in particular, what would we see? We'd see this. We'd see one LED sender taking a 3x3 section, which basically gives us a full HD, right? We then have another sender for the top right, but this time 2 cabinets wide, 3 cabinets high. Then on the bottom row, you see a 3x1 and a 2x1, right? So in reality, what that gives us is that where you've got 4 sending boxes, all managing a unique resolution of content in order to output to the visible pixels that they see. So what we typically see in those cases, while the FX4 or other devices like graphics cards could do that, they could output custom resolutions, we'd likely see a lot of tearing between the seams of these red lines, right? And that's what we need to try to avoid, because it's more noticeable on LED because you don't have any bezels, right? There's no plastic border to compensate, blanking levels and things like that. We literally are just drawing the pixels that we see. So we really have to be careful with the tearing, okay? So what we want to try to do in order to solve that is we want to find a way to get these sending boxes all receiving exactly the same signal. So ideally what we'd want to do is say, can we give full HD to this one, this one, this one, and this one? Well, the answer is yes, you can. Of course you can, right? But the problem which we had before, or the challenge we had with the previous versions of the FX4 and other devices, is that if they recognize, or this sending box communicates an EDID of full HD, what we would do is we'd take the crop and scale it to full HD. And then we'd actually get a mismatch of content, because actually we'd be scaling when we don't want the box to scale, right? So in order to avoid that, what we need to do is keep the visible pixels, let's say 1280 by 1080, we need to keep that the same and just pad the rest of the signal, the rest of the full HD, with pixels that we're just going to crop away in the sender, right? So that is essentially the challenge and the solution, okay? So it looks a little bit like that. You've got the signal here in blue. This is the content that will appear on the wall. And then we've got this black bordered area filling the sides and the bottom. It's basically just dead pixels that the controller, the sender, will crop away and not display on the active pixels of the wall. Okay, so that was a challenge. That's the solution. Okay, so in essence, what it looks like is something like that. We output 4 full HDs, all frame locked and gen locked, and then we've just added these black border areas for each of the other senders that didn't quite fill a full HD. Okay, so does that make sense? Have we got any questions? Have I lost anyone at that point? Okay, I'll assume not.
No, for now, yeah, well, for now we don't have any questions right now. Então, mas se alguém tiver alguma pergunta, alguma coisa, pode mandar que a gente está acompanhando. Eu não sei se vocês conseguiram pegar tudo que o Greg mostrou ali, mas agora também ele vai mostrar como montar tudo aqui dentro do Wall Designer. Então, às vezes a gente recebe algumas dúvidas de como montar, como usar com LED. Agora vai ser uma explicação bem interessante, mostrando como a gente pode pegar e montar com essas resoluções quebradas e tudo mais, como a gente pode fazer o melhor aproveitamento da FX4.
Okay. So let's take a look here at the software to make it more visible what we're trying to do. So Wall Designer is the name of the software, the configuration software for these multi-display products. So if you want to, Danilo, you can write into Facebook the web page domain that others can actually go to the web browser version of Wall Designer and play along as I'm demonstrating if they like. The domain is walldesigner.datapath.co.uk. So if you go to that, you'll be able to go to Wall Designer web browser and play along as I go through. Okay, so let's imagine a wall in a simple term. We've got a 4K wall here. That's the easiest one, designed to a space. Basically got full HD here, full HD on the right. I've imagined that I'm using a planar, I think it's TVF 2.5 to do this one. And I'm using a IOLITE S6 as my sending box, right, the full HD. So in simple terms, what I've effectively done is said, I want to take a 4K source, let's imagine a bright sign player, and display the content on a 4K LED wall. The technical challenge is simply, how do I crop and split 4K from one source to 4 full HD sending boxes? Quite simply, an F4 does the job. You put a 4K player in here, split it into 4 full HDs. So that is the simplest case if we're designing the wall to a resolution. Okay? And if we imagine the same wall, same 4K LED wall, instead of the 4K player, I want to use a full HD player. So as well as...
Greg, I think you are just like beating your hand or touching your hand on the mic. So it's just like... Okay,
I've got an internal mic, so every time I click, it probably goes away. So I'll remember that. I keep forgetting. So let's imagine same wall, but instead of using a 4K media player, I use a full HD player. So the technical challenge here is not only splitting one player into 4, but it's how do I split and scale full HD into 4K. So that's something the FX4 has done for a long time with LCD and others. I'm also saying player, the guys in rental and stage would see the same thing if they're using a graphics output, let's say from an AMD card or an NVIDIA card, right? So the same thing goes to them. They would see a virtual display of 4K or full HD from an FX4 and use virtual displays to map the content, right? So nothing really new and exciting there. Where we do start to see things come in is here. So this is what I was telling you before. I've got the top left portion is managing full HD of cabinet. The top right is 960 by 1080. The bottom left is 1920 by 540. The bottom right is 960 by 540. So those would be the amount of pixels that we see on the wall. When we look at output resolution, that is the resolution that's been output by the FX4 to, in this case, a IOLITE S6 sending box. So you can see when the fixture resolution is lower than the output resolution, we know what we need is going to be these colored borders or signal padding that we're now adding inside the FX4. Okay. So again, the wall is still 16:9. The content will scale up quite nicely. The only thing we've had to rely on is scaling and splitting as well as adding these borders. Okay. Where it starts to get more complicated is when we say things like this. Imagine in this case, I've got a planar TVF 2.5, but I've just simply had a requirement from the client, give me the biggest wall you can of a 2.5 mil pixel pitch in a 6 meter by 3 meter space. In this case, using these cabinets, that fills 5.5 meters wide by 2.7 meters high. That's the most amount of cabinets I can get into 6 by 3 meters. Okay, so that then leaves us with not only the challenge of colored borders and splitting and scaling, but it also now creates the issue of aspect ratio, I believe, or maybe that would still give us. Okay, yeah, here we go. So what we're now doing is not only splitting, not only scaling, not only adding colored borders, but we get into the second technical challenge, which is what happens to my content when the wall is not 16 by 9, but the content is 16 by 9. So now we get into some other features. We get into this maintain aspect ratio feature. So if we look at this blue line that's being drawn all the way round, that is our original 16:9 full HD content. Okay, the same applies if I change that into 4K. You still see the blue line stays the same because it's based on aspect ratios as opposed to resolution. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we can say we'll allow you on the content when the wall is not 16:9 but the content is, we will allow you to crop the content in order to maintain the aspect ratio. Essentially, we're just cropping a small section here at the top and small section here at the bottom, and the rest of it is the content you see on the wall. Okay. You could, if you want to, this is rarely used, but maybe you could show all of the content, essentially squashing or compressing the content into the wall. Again, that's rarely used, depends on how extreme the differences between the aspect ratios are as opposed to the effect. So if I change this to a test pattern, what you'll see is if the original content here starts as circles, by the time we've compressed it a little bit, the circles start to lose their shape a little bit. And the more we compress or the more we stretch, the more distortion to the signal we start to see. Okay. Now, the other feature that we can do is we can maintain the aspect ratio, but instead of losing bits on the top, we pull the content down, and so we show all of the content on the wall, and we add something which is essentially letterboxing. You see this border color here. This is the colored borders that I mentioned. We're padding the signal, but in this case, we're also having to pad visible pixels onto the wall because the actual content doesn't fill the entire visible area. So essentially, we're letterboxing it. And we can move that content to any section of the LED wall, and the letterboxing just follows the spare visible pixels that don't have any video content inside them. Okay, so again, that applies if I change here. Got the same TVF 2.5s, but instead of a 6x3, I've gone to a 6x4. So I've added more cabinets vertically. I've now got 3.7 meters high instead of 2.7. But in principle, the same things apply. When you maintain the aspect ratio this time, instead of seeing it at the top and the bottom, we see that we lose the content on the left and on the right. Okay, same things apply. Pull that content in. This time the letterboxing goes to the top and to the bottom. The other thing.
Greg, we have a question here. Let's go there. So Jonathan Martinazzo is asking if I have more than one FX4 delivering 4K on each one of them using a sync generator, should I have a sync between all the outputs of the FX4s? Just like an example, a graphic card with 3 4K outputs and 3 FX4, and generating a sync on the FX4. How can he manage that?
Okay, so assuming that your graphics card guarantees the outputs are synced, some do, some don't. Some require an actual sync card as well as the graphics card to do it. Assuming that your graphics cards are guaranteed to be synced, the FX4s will remain synced throughout, assuming that all of the timings of the outputs are also the same, right? So it will continue.
Just like the new, I think NVIDIA Quadro has a sync card.
Yeah,
right?
some of them, it's just one GPU. Some of them require a sync card if they use multiple GPUs. Some require a sync card even for one GPU. And that depends on manufacturer, depends on graphics card. So you'd have to ask AMD or NVIDIA or whomever that you're buying the graphics card from. But if those graphics outputs are synced, assuming that the outputs of the FX4 are all the same in the chain, everything will continue to be synced.
Então, como o Greg acabou de colocar aqui, então se for garantido que a placa faz esse sync, então tem alguns exemplos, a NVIDIA e AMD, se elas tiverem o sync, a FX4 vai seguir esse sync, sim, e a gente não vai ter problema algum. Então é possível utilizar, sim, mas a gente, na verdade sempre vai depender do que a placa está entregando. Então, se a placa entregar um sync correto, a gente vai conseguir acompanhar esse sync sem problema algum. So, Greg, let's move on.
So that's, I mean, more or less specifically about the LED integration. Of course, if anybody wants to learn just briefly about how Wall Designer works in general, I'm happy to do that. or if everyone here is already familiar and they just wanted to learn about LED, that's pretty much the LED part. We've added, so instead of choosing from the database here a manufacturer of display and model, what we essentially do is use the drop-down menu here as LED sender, choose the manufacturer, the model, which in best practice should be the model number of the cabinet, and then add the quantity of cabinets for that section. Let's say it's 8x2 or 8x4 or 8x8 or whatever, just to differentiate them. Because of course, what you then have is you have your fixture resolution, which is the visible pixels that controls, and the output resolution, which is the output resolution from FX4 to sending card, controller, or integrated controller. All right. That was pretty much everything about the LED integration. Is there anything else while I'm on the line that people want to know or want a demo about inside Wall Designer?
Então, se alguém quiser tiver mais alguma pergunta sobre a FX4, até de alguma coisa do Wall Designer, a gente consegue fazer uma demo aqui agora, mostrar. A gente quis mostrar que era essa parte mais do LED, que é essa parte nova. Muita gente estava perguntando de como esse é um mercado que está crescendo bastante. A gente quis mostrar, muita gente aqui já conhece o que a FX4 é capaz de fazer com Video Wall, já é bem mais tranquilo, já tem resolução fechada, então é mais tranquilo. Também muita gente aqui usa a FX4 com projeção, mas se tiverem alguma dúvida, alguma coisa, a gente consegue mostrar o que for necessário. Então, se alguém quiser fazer alguma pergunta aqui no chat, a gente já demonstra e já coloca para vocês aqui já.
All set? Any other?
Yeah, I think right now I just told to the guys here if they have any questions about not we show with everything on LED part, but if they have any questions about how to use the FX4 for mapping projection for video wall, we can show here because we can do a lot of things using the FX4 line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mas se alguém tiver mais alguma pergunta também, já estão todos os contatos aqui, a gente consegue responder, pode mandar para a gente aqui, pode mandar nos meus contatos também, a gente já consegue responder para todo mundo. Era uma demo bem rápida aqui, mostrando tudo que a gente pode fazer. A gente vai ver aqui também de mostrar, boa parte das pessoas aqui, além de usar FX4 e tudo mais, a gente tem o pessoal de rental que hoje tá aqui também dando uma conferida. Isso é uma das coisas que a gente consegue fazer e entregar nos projetos, além das placas de captura também, que são bem utilizadas por vocês aí. So I don't think anyone has any questions right now. I'm not seeing any question showing up here. But Greg, send me this presentation so I can share with the guys after that, because I'm going to put this on the YouTube, so I can put the link of the presentation there.
Sure, will do. And if anyone wants to send me an email, if you put my email address in the chat, if they need me, I'm more than happy to help.
Então, galera, acho que foi isso, foi bem rápido, bem simples e realmente isso para mostrar o quão simples a FX4 é. Então não tem muito segredo, não é um produto que é extremamente complicado. O que a gente quer mostrar é que esse produto vai facilitar muito a vida, não só para montagem de LED, montagem de visual, montagem de mapping. Então é isso aí também. So Greg, thank you very much for the presentation. It was awesome as usual. And
Thank you.
we can talk later. So enjoy the beat right now.
Will do. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Take care.